This 20-second video consists of several parts, because a lot of measurements have to be taken on the pistons, piston rings and cylinders before you can install them. In part 1 of this 20-second video, we measured the piston ring end gap. In part 2, we will now measure the side clearance of the piston rings. To perform the measurements, the piston grooves and piston rings must of course be clean, free of carbon deposits and oil residues. In video 21 of this series, we show how to clean the piston. We recommend thoroughly inspecting used, but also new piston rings before installation. For this, we refer you to video 25 in this series. The values for the clearance for each of the 3 piston rings are listed under points 3 and 4 in the VW Workshop Manual. This table is from the VW Manual for our AB 1300 engine. This book dates from 1970. The lowest values are those for new parts, upon installation. The wear limit is the maximum amount of side clearance that you may observe. The wear limit is used as a reference for used engines. To measure the side clearance, you need to have a range of feeler gauges, ideally from 0.02 of a millimeter to 0.15 of a millimeter. The smallest value you will need is for the oil scraper ring, which is barely a few hundredths of a millimeter. These are wafer-thin feeler gauges. Here we show the cross-section of a piston, with the top, or first compression ring on the left. The side clearance is the degree to which the piston ring can move up and down in the piston groove, in an axial direction. The side clearance of the top compression ring is the largest. You can feel it by hand, as we show here. The side clearance of the lower compression ring is smaller and barely perceptible. The clearance on the oil scraper ring cannot be felt. Let's take another look at the drawing of the piston cross-section. When we take a closer look at the top compression ring, the play between the piston ring and the piston becomes visible. For didactic reasons, this drawing shows an exaggerated clearance. This axial play, or side clearance, is important for 2 reasons. The first reason is that the piston rings must be able to move freely in the piston grooves. The piston rings must be able to move freely in the piston grooves when the piston expands. If this is not possible, friction between the piston ring and the piston will cause heat to build up until the piston ring gives up. Here we show how the piston rings can move freely in the piston grooves. The second reason is because the clearance plays an important role in building up compression. The spring tension of the piston ring is not enough to properly seal the piston against the cylinder wall. The piston ring needs help from the compressed fuel mixture. The red line indicates that the mixture flows through the space between the piston ring and the piston. This creates a thrust against the back of the piston ring. As a result, the piston ring is pushed against the cylinder wall. It is this force that ensures a hermetic seal of the piston, and thus proper compression. If the side clearance is too large, the mixture can get in, but there is not enough pressure to properly seal the piston ring. If the side clearance is too small, the mixture cannot get in, and therefore no extra pressure is generated behind the piston ring. For these 2 reasons, the side clearance of the piston rings, or axial clearance, must be between the values indicated by the manufacturer. When installing new piston rings in combination with used pistons, we recommend first measuring the piston and piston rings. This measurement will also give you an idea of how much clearance there is. In part 1, we measured the inside diameter of the cylinders with a caliper. The inside diameter of our cylinders is 77 mm. In the Paruzzi web store, we find the right piston rings for a Type 1 1300 engine with a bore of 77 mm. The compression rings are 2 mm thick, and the oil scraper ring is 4 mm thick. We can conclude from this that the slots, or grooves, of the compression rings should be at least 2 mm and no more than 2 mm plus the wear limit. The slot of the oil scraper ring should be at least 4 mm and no more than 4 mm plus the wear limit. With these values in mind, we will measure the grooves of the piston rings. We do not need a super accurate measurement, so a caliper is sufficient. This is the used piston from cylinder 1 of our AB 1300 engine. The groove of the first compression ring is 2.18 mm. The groove of the second compression ring is smaller because the side clearance is smaller. The width is 2.14 mm. The groove of the oil scraper ring is 4.03 mm wide. We repeat the measurement all around to confirm the values. This is not about an accurate measurement. We simply want to know if the grooves of both compression rings are wider than 2 mm, and if the groove of the oil scraper ring is wider than 4 mm. Now, just to be sure, we will measure the thickness of the piston rings. To measure the piston rings, you need a micrometer with a range of 2 to 4 mm. This small micrometer is suitable for this purpose. Its range is from 0 to 25 mm. Consult the manual of your micrometer to ensure accurate measurement. We recommend that you first calibrate the micrometer, as we want a very accurate measurement, to within 1/100th of a millimeter. Here we show how we use a 25 mm calibration rod to determine whether the micrometer is correctly adjusted. We read a value that corresponds to the calibration rod, exactly 25 mm. Now we can measure all the piston rings in our new set. We start with the top compression ring. We measure a thickness of exactly 2 mm. Perform the measurement at various points around the circumference of the piston ring. We do the same for the bottom compression ring. Here too, the thickness is exactly 2 mm. Now we measure the oil scraper ring. This is an original ring, as supplied by VW. We measure exactly 4 mm. Now that we know the piston rings are the correct size, we can measure the side clearance. Mount the piston rings on the pistons, as we explained in video 21. For the top compression ring, the VW manual gives a maximum value of 0.12 of a millimeter. We start with a feeler gauge that is thicker than the wear limit, which is 0.13 of a millimeter. We try to push this feeler gauge between the top of the compression ring and the piston. Try in different places around the piston. The feeler gauge of 0.13 cannot fit between them. This means that the side clearance is at least equal to or less than the wear limit. We do the same with a feeler gauge of 0.12. 0.12 mm is the wear limit. This feeler gauge also cannot fit, with the exception of a few places where the feeler gauge tends to be able to slide in. This is a used piston with new piston rings. The feeler gauge of 11/100ths can be inserted around it without resistance. We do the same for the lower compression ring. The wear limit is 10/100ths of a millimeter. We start with the feeler gauge of 11/100ths of a millimeter. It cannot be inserted. We try 8/100ths. Then 6/100ths, which is still just a little too thick. The feeler gauge of 5/100ths of a millimeter slides between the second compression ring and the piston without resistance. The wear limit for the original VW oil scraper ring is 10/100ths of a millimeter. The feeler gauge of 3/100ths is the thickest feeler gauge that can be slid into it without resistance. We summarize the measurement results. The piston ring side clearance of cylinders 1, 2, 3 and 4 are below the wear limit. The second compression ring and the oil scraper ring are within the new installation value. The first compression ring has a higher side clearance. This is because the grooves in the pistons are worn. The higher clearance of the top compression ring will not do the compression any good. In principle, these pistons can still be used, but it all depends on the application of this engine. In part 3 of this video, we will discuss the importance of piston weight. More information about all the parts and tools used in this video series can be found as comments under each video on our YouTube channel. See you soon.